January 27th, 1945. 3 in the afternoon. The temperature in Auschwitz, Poland, was below freezing. 4 Soviet soldiers on horseback were riding along a snow-covered road in southwestern Poland near the town of Auschwitz, a name barely known outside of Europe. They were scouts from the 322nd Rifle Division, part of the 60th Army of the 1st Ukrainian Front. They were not looking for a prison. They were not looking for a death camp. They did not even know one existed here. Their mission was simple: push west, keep the pressure on retreating German forces. Then they saw the wire. Soviet soldier Ivan Martinushkin was among the first to approach the fence. He recalled it later to the Times of Israel. "We knew nothing." Then he saw the inmates behind the barbed wire. "I remember their faces," he said, "especially their eyes which betrayed their ordeal." Those eyes belonged to the survivors of Auschwitz-Birkenau, the largest killing center in human history. The Red Army had stumbled into a place that the Nazis had spent 5 years building into a machine, not a factory, a machine for murdering people. And here is the real reason Allied soldiers were told never to enter Auschwitz alone. It was not just about protecting one soldier, it was about what that place could do to a person's mind, to their body, to their ability to function as a human being. Cold, wire, silence. If you value documented wartime history told with honesty and care like this, subscribe. It's the best way to support our work. And drop a comment letting us know what city you're watching from right now. This script is deeply researched and factual, drawing from sources including the Auschwitz-Birkenau Memorial and museum official historical records, published on their website auschwitz.org, and the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum Encyclopedia, whose Liberation of Nazi Camps article was last reviewed and updated in 2025, the 80th anniversary of the liberation. These are not opinion pieces. They are institutional repositories of primary source documents, survivor testimony, and forensic investigation. Now back to the information. The camp began in 1940. Rudolf Franz Ferdinand Höss, a former German cavalry soldier born in Baden-Baden on November the 25th, 1901, was sent to evaluate a cluster of old Austro-Hungarian army barracks near Auschwitz. He gave a favorable report. The SS approved. And on May 4th, 1940, Höss became the first commandant of what would soon be called Auschwitz. He had previously served at Dachau and Sachsenhausen. He had seen camps before. He thought he knew what he was building. He did not understand yet what he was capable of. By 1942, the camp had transformed from a prisoner of war facility into something for which there was no word yet in any language. The Nazis were calling it the final solution. At Auschwitz-Birkenau, the second and largest of 3 main subcamps, the SS had constructed 300 prison barracks, 4 bathhouses in which prisoners were gassed, corpse cellars, and a series of crematoria capable, according to a report written from inside the camp, of burning 8,000 bodies per day. That report was written by Witold Pilecki. Pilecki was a Polish cavalry captain born in 1901 who, in September 1940, deliberately allowed himself to be arrested by the Nazis during a street roundup in Warsaw. He had volunteered, voluntarily, to be imprisoned in Auschwitz. He was given inmate number 4,859. His mission: organize a resistance movement inside the camp and send intelligence reports back to the Polish Home Army in Warsaw and then to the British government in London. Beginning in November 1940, his messages began flowing out of the camp. From March 1941, they were reaching Allied governments directly. His was the first comprehensive record of a Holocaust death camp to reach the Western Allies. He escaped in April 1943. He spent 2 years and nearly 7 months inside. The Allies received the reports, they discussed them, and they decided not to bomb the camp. That decision has been argued over for decades, but here's the cold part. While governments debated, the killing accelerated. In the summer of 1944, over 400,000 Hungarian Jews arrived at Auschwitz-Birkenau. The gas chambers and crematoria were running at maximum capacity. In May and June of that year alone, the SS was gassing nearly 10,000 people per day. The crematoria could not keep up, so Höss ordered mass pits to be dug. Bodies were burned in open fields outside the camp buildings. Neighbors in Auschwitz could smell it. Höss left the command on January 18, 1945, 9 days before the Soviets arrived. He walked away. Disguised himself as a German naval petty officer, hid among sailors at a Navy base on the island of Sylt. The British detained him briefly and released him to work on a farm as a field hand. He was farming in northern Germany while investigators across Europe tried to understand the scale of what had happened at his camp. What the Soviet soldiers found on January 27th did not need explanation. It was physical, impossible to look away from. Red Army General Vasily Petrenko, commander of the 107th Infantry Division, said this: "I, who saw people dying every day, was shocked by the Nazis' indescribable hatred toward the inmates who had turned into living skeletons." Petrenko was a battle-hardened general. He had watched men die in combat for years. He was not prepared for Auschwitz. The soldiers found 600 corpses. They found 300 prison barracks. They found 6 storehouses. In the storehouses that had not been burned, they found 370,000 men's suits, 837,000 articles of women's clothing, and 7 tons, that is 7.7 tons, of human hair, shaved from the heads of prisoners before and after death, packed in bales to be sold back to German textile factories. They found 88 pounds of eyeglasses, 44,000 pairs of shoes, 12,000 pots and pans brought by victims who had believed, or told to believe, they were being resettled somewhere new, somewhere they would cook meals and start over. They found 500 children still alive behind the wire. Soviet Lieutenant Yuri Ilinsky was among the liberating soldiers. He wrote this: "Men, women, children behind the wires. It left the strongest impression on me, on my soldiers. A whole crowd of children, from tiny 2 or 3-year-olds to teenagers, skinny, ragged, sick, hungry. We gave them everything that was in our backpacks." Now, why were soldiers specifically warned never to enter Auschwitz alone? 3 reasons, each one worse than the last. The first reason was disease. Auschwitz had been a place of raging epidemics since 1942. Typhus, tuberculosis, dysentery, malaria. These were not background conditions. Typhus alone had claimed the lives of tens of thousands of prisoners, according to records kept by the Auschwitz-Birkenau Memorial. By the time the Soviets arrived, the 7,000 survivors still inside the camp were not just malnourished. They were contagious. Their bodies were carrying active infections at levels that could kill a healthy soldier in weeks. The official site at Auschwitz.org documents that in 1942 and 1943, the typhus epidemic raged so severely that even SS physicians died from it, including the head SS camp physician who died in May 1942, forcing the camp command to begin fumigating clothing and introducing mass gas chamber selection of symptomatic prisoners just to stop the SS garrison from collapsing. Survivors who were moved from Auschwitz to other camps, Bergen-Belsen, Mauthausen, Ravensbrück, carried these diseases with them. When British forces liberated Bergen-Belsen on April 15, 1945, they found 60,000 prisoners, many suffering from active typhus. The mortality rate among those typhus patients was over 60%. At Bergen-Belsen, over 13,000 survivors died from disease alone within 3 months of liberation. A soldier who walked into Auschwitz alone, without protective protocol, without backup, without medical awareness, was a soldier walking into a biological hazard zone. The second reason was structural danger. The retreating SS had destroyed evidence obsessively in the days before liberation. On January 20th, they blew up Crematoria 2 and 3. On January 26th, they blew up Crematorium 5. On January 23rd, they set fire to the massive Canada 2 warehouse complex, a series of 30 barracks holding property stolen from extermination victims. The fire burned for days. By the time the Soviets arrived, much of the camp was structurally compromised, with buildings that had been partially destroyed, partially burned, riddled with unexploded material and unstable walls. The grounds between the barracks hid mass graves. There were areas inside the camp that had not yet been cleared or assessed. A soldier who wandered alone had no one to watch his back. And in a space this large, with this much destruction, that was a tactical problem as much as a physical one. The Auschwitz complex was not one camp. It was 3 main camps and 40 satellite camps spread across the region. The main camp, Auschwitz I, had the original brick barracks. Auschwitz II, known as Birkenau, established in October 1941, was where the killing had been industrialized. Auschwitz III, known as Monowitz, had been the labor camp serving the IG Farben chemical plant nearby. Together, the complex occupied an enormous footprint. It took more than 230 Soviet soldiers' lives just to clear the surrounding area and the town of Auschwitz, including the commander of the 472nd Infantry Regiment, Colonel Semen Lvovich Bezprozvany, who was killed in the fighting around Monowitz. This was not a passive site. German units were still resisting in the surrounding terrain. The third reason was what it did to the human mind. No one, not even the most experienced combat veteran, was prepared for what was inside Auschwitz. We are not talking about bodies on a battlefield. We are not talking about a bombed city. We are talking about a system, a deliberate, documented, bureaucratically managed system for destroying human beings, run over 5 years. That left physical evidence at a scale that could not be processed alone. One person, walking into that camp alone, had no psychological anchor, no one next to them to confirm what they were seeing was real, no one to stop them if their mind began to fracture under the weight of it. The Soviet investigators and medical personnel who came in after liberation worked in teams, always in teams. The extraordinary Soviet State Commission for the Investigation of the Crimes of the German Fascist Aggressors arrived the day after liberation, January 28th, and began autopsies, opened mass graves, and interviewed former prisoners. Their investigators did not work alone. The Polish Red Cross did not work alone. The field hospital set up on the site of the former main camp treated 4,500 survivors. The teams working in those hospitals worked in shifts, in groups, always with another person present. This was not an accident of logistics. When the survivors were finally fed and bathed, strange things happened. The nurses discovered that when they came to bathe the prisoners hid. They associated the word bath with the gas chambers. Others hoarded bread under their mattresses at night because they could not believe they would be given more food in the morning. For 5 years, the logic of the camp had been the logic of death. You were fed just enough to work, and when you could not work, you were killed. Some survivors could not stop operating under that logic even after liberation. They had been psychologically restructured by the camp's routine. A soldier who entered alone without preparation was walking into that psychological field. As late as June 1945, 300 survivors remained at the camp, too weak to be moved anywhere. Now, Rudolf Höss. The British tracked him down in March 1946. His wife and children had been located north of Hanover. Under pressure, the family gave up his location. Höss was arrested, still disguised as a farmhand, and taken to the Nuremberg trials. He testified. He signed an affidavit on May 14, 1946, held today at the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum. The document reads, "I declare herewith under oath that in the years 1941 to 1943, during my tenure in office as commandant of Auschwitz concentration camp, 2 million Jews were put to death by gassing and 500,000 by other means. Later historical research and forensic investigation by Polish authorities, the Auschwitz-Birkenau Memorial, and independent historians established the more specific figure, 1.1 million people murdered at Auschwitz, approximately 1 million of them Jews, drawn from across occupied Europe." Höss was handed to Polish authorities. His trial began March 11, 1947 in Warsaw. The verdict came April 2, 1947, death by hanging. At the request of former Auschwitz prisoners, the execution was carried out on the grounds of the camp itself, in front of the building that had once housed the commandant's office. A gallows was built specifically for the occasion. Höss asked, as his last request, for a cup of coffee and a Catholic priest. He drank the coffee. Father Tadeusz Zaremba, a Salesian from Auschwitz, stood beside him. The hangman placed the noose at 10 in the morning on April 16, 1947. A physician declared Höss dead at 10:21. His body was cremated. His ashes were thrown into the nearby river. The man who had managed the largest mass murder in European history was buried in no grave, in no marked location, in no named place. If you value documented, honest, fact-first history like this, subscribe. It genuinely helps us keep making this. And drop a comment telling us what city you're watching from right now. This video's research draws specifically from 2 institutional sources: the peer-reviewed historical records of the Auschwitz-Birkenau State Museum, available at auschwitz.org, whose Liberation of KL Auschwitz article was last updated in 2025 for the 80th anniversary, and from the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum encyclopedia entry on Soviet forces liberating Auschwitz, which synthesizes the Soviet 60th Army's own field documentation. These are not Wikipedia summaries. They are sourced from original documents, testimonies given directly to investigators in 1945, and physical forensic evidence gathered on site beginning January 28, 1945. Back to the story. One more thing about the man who first tried to warn the world. Witold Pilecki, prisoner number 4,859, the only known person to voluntarily enter Auschwitz, escaped in April 1943. He fought in the Warsaw Uprising of 1944. After the war ended, he went back into Poland, this time to gather intelligence on the Soviet-installed communist government. He was captured by Polish communist authorities on May 8, 1947. He was tortured. He was forced to sign a confession. He was denied the right to testify at his own trial, and no defending witnesses were permitted. On May 25, 1948, Witold Pilecki was shot by the Polish Communist Security Service, the man who had voluntarily walked into Auschwitz, who had sent the first intelligence reports out of a death camp, who had survived 2 years and 7 months inside the worst place in Europe, was killed not by the Nazis. He was killed by his own government 3 years after the war ended. His report, known today as Witold's report, was classified and hidden for decades. It was first reconstructed and published in 2000. An English translation titled The Auschwitz Volunteer, Beyond Bravery, was published in 2012, 67 years after Pilecki escaped the camp. The extraordinary Soviet State Commission that investigated Auschwitz beginning January 28, 1945, documented the following in its findings. The hair, the shoes, the suits, the cookware. They measured and photographed and weighed. They opened the graves. They found what the retreating SS had tried to burn and had not finished burning. That commission's work, along with the Polish investigations of 1945 and 1946 that led to the trials of Höss and 47 other former camp personnel, created the legal and evidentiary foundation for the Nuremberg trials. It was not just history, it became law. In the years after liberation, studies were conducted on surviving prisoners. A 1991 study published in the American Journal of Psychiatry examined 124 Holocaust survivors using DSM-3R diagnostic criteria. 63% had been detained in concentration camps. 46% of the total sample met the full diagnostic criteria for post-traumatic stress disorder. The group of 20 Auschwitz survivors with tattooed identification numbers, the people who had been inside the machine, had significantly more symptoms and were 3 times more likely to meet the diagnostic criteria for post-traumatic stress disorder than survivors who had not been in concentration camps. Most had never received adequate psychiatric care. Many never spoke publicly about what they had seen. Henry Kitschke, an Auschwitz survivor, said this to the BBC, "You did not live through Auschwitz. The place itself is death." The Soviet soldiers who entered on January 27, 1945, the 4 scouts on horseback who saw the wire first, who had no idea what they were riding toward, received no psychological preparation. None existed. No protocol had ever been written for what they were about to find, because nothing like it had ever been found before. Those soldiers entered together. They stayed together. They looked after each other. 231 Soviet soldiers died in the fighting around Monowitz, Birkenau, Auschwitz I, and the town of Auschwitz to make that liberation happen. Their names are documented in the memorial records at auschwitz.org. The last survivor too weak to leave Auschwitz under her own power was still at the camp in June 1945, 5 months after liberation. She had arrived weighing 23 kilograms. She was 155 centimeters tall. She was 31 years old. There is no grave for Rudolf Höss. There are 1.1 million graves, most of them unmarked, in the soil around Auschwitz, Poland. The gallows are still standing.